Hello, and welcome to the Live Blissed Out podcast, helping demystify decision making so you can get unstuck and take action. I'm your host, Marissa Houston, bringing you another blissful episode. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast should not be considered professional advice. This is episode 6 of the Live Blissed Out podcast. Thanks for joining me. Our topic for this episode is garage doors, and my guest is Chris Tyrell. Chris is the founder and president of Chris's Garage Doors. He has been working on garage doors for over 5 years and started his own company. He takes a lot of pride in doing quality work and strives to provide his customers with the best experience possible and the highest quality product. He regularly enjoys teaching people how to maintain their garage doors and has a wealth of knowledge that he is eager to share. One of the things that Chris values most is giving to his community and has set up his company to partner with different nonprofits throughout the year. For more information and tips on how to tune up your door, visit his website at chrisgaragecolorado.com. Hi, Chris. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks, Marissa, for having me.
Well, it's great to have you. I'm really excited to talk with you about garage doors because, let's be honest, most people don't actually wake up and think about their garage doors. It's something that we use on a daily basis, especially here in the United States. And we likely use it more often than we do our front doors because we open up the door, we park our cars in the garage, and then we get in the house that way. And we don't give it a second thought unless something bad happens or there may be a security issue or it's making noises or something is going on with it. So I would like our listeners to get the 411 on garage doors and what they should be thinking about.
Well, that's a broad scope. There's a lot of things that you can think about. And you're right. People do use their garage doors as if it was their front door. You've got trash cans in there that you're taking out. You got bikes. If you've got kids, you're in and out all the time. One thing that people don't think about is that the garage door is, in most houses, the largest moving mechanism in the entire house. And so with that, you've got a lot of wear and tear that can happen, a lot of things that can break. And one thing I always recommend is if you use your garage door primarily to get in and out of your house, always carry with you a key to get in your house another way, because there's no preventing a garage door from breaking at some point. And if your garage door breaks and you're outside of the house and you don't have a key, you'll have to break into your house a different way. But yeah, there's a lot of things. Tune-ups, I always recommend getting a tune-up on a regular basis. The industry standard is every year, but there's ways you can do a tune-up yourself. If you know the steps, you can kind of evaluate the door, look through it, and make sure it's running functionally, and then just look for warning signs that would need you to have a professional come on site.
So there are really 3 things I'm thinking about. We have the maintenance side of it. We have the issue of whether or not we should fix a problem, and if it's something we can do ourselves or if it's something we need to hire a professional for. And then there's also the factor of replacing a garage door. I mean, when do you do that? For example, you might move into a new home and you might not like how it looks. And just for that reason, you're going to say, hey, I'm in the market for a new garage door. I don't care whether this works perfectly and it'll work for 20 years. I don't like how it looks and I'm going to replace it. So there's the aesthetic side of it. But then we know that there's also the mechanical side of it. We have the thing that actually lifts the door,
yes,
right?
Of course.
And that now is more electronic in a way. And what happens with that is there's all these new innovations. There's things like apps that connect there that tell you whether the door is open or not. So that's more of a security side of it. So what should people be looking for in those 3 areas? So for example, how do I maintain my existing door? And how do I decide whether I should fix or replace? And how does that look for a consumer?
Yeah, so a lot of questions are answered on what you can afford or what your budget is, because most of the time you can fix up a door pretty well. And there are certain situations where I'll go on site and I'll say, look, this door it's in very bad shape and it's a poorly made door or it's damaged beyond repair. Those things do happen. But a lot of times, one of the more common issues that happens with the actual door itself is the springs will break. And the springs are something that's pretty easy to fix. And normally you'll get function of the door back right away and you don't have to spend the money to replace a whole door. But being that most garage doors are attached to the front of the house, big issue is curb appeal. And so some people They just hate pulling up to their house and seeing this big ugly door and they want it replaced. So there's definitely options. And the big question is, what kind of investment are you getting? Like, is it worth replacing the door? Are you going to get your money back down the road? And actually, in today's market, 2018, there was a report on the cost versus value report that showed that a new upscale garage door is the number one project for return on investment for mid-range projects. It was the first time that it jumped to the top of the list, but they estimated a 98.3% return on investment. So getting a new garage door right now is actually a pretty good option, especially if you're going to upgrade it to something that's a little bit nicer, whether it's a wood grain look or you get some nice windows on there, stuff like that, that really adds to the curb appeal, because what that's going to do is that's going to increase the value of the house as a whole. So it's definitely a good option to think about.
Are there different materials that we should consider in terms of how they're built? So, for example, I noticed the really upscale doors look like wood. I don't even know if they're made of wood, but they look like wood. And then there are the common ones, which look really nice, that are metal. And then recently I've seen ones where they just have all glass, which seem really nice. But then I personally get concerned because I'm thinking, is that safe for me to be protected so that I know that somebody isn't going to be able to just break into my garage door? So what kind of alternatives should we be looking at from your professional insight?
Well, the overwhelming majority of garage doors today are made from steel. So the glass doors, they're made with aluminum frames typically, and then they have windows inserted. And then there's actually some of them that have almost all glass. There's some new designs that look really sleek. Those tend to be safe because you can upgrade the glass. If you get a double pane, like a 1/2 inch piece of glass in there, it's going to be harder to cut into than those steel panels. It's actually safe, and you can get them tinted or frosted so nobody can see inside, and they do create a really cool look. So that's an option. And then those wooden doors, the majority of doors are made out of steel. All the new wooden doors made today are all custom built. They're the most expensive types of doors on the market. There is a middle grade option where you can have a steel door and then have like wood glued to the front of it. So it maintains the integrity of the steel. It's lighter weight and durable, but it has real wood on the outside. And then they also have options where you can put like a composite material on the outside to create like a barn door look. But one of my favorite options is they have steel doors that are painted like wood. And there's one company that I use that it looks almost real. Like you can't really tell until you get really close that the wood isn't actual wood.
So it's like the best of both worlds because you get the look, but you get the security of having a steel door.
It's more the ease of the functionality. Steel doors are nicer because steel doesn't warp and bend and get weather damage and stuff like that. It stays
So it's longer lasting.
And it's lighter weight. So you don't need as strong of a spring, and it's just a better maintainable door.
Then let's say that I'm a consumer and I decided, okay, I'm going to get Chris's recommendation. I'm going to get this door. This is the door that I want. Okay, so I go ahead and do that. How do you go about selecting the different door styles? Do customers pretty much talk to you directly and you take care of it? Do they go to a big box store? Do they go to some sort of, I don't know, garage outlet or I don't even know if that exists, but how do they figure out what the right door is for them? And I don't even know if this is something they can DIY. Like, do they measure it themselves and go, or are they better off talking to you so that you can make that process easier for them?
Yeah, I always recommend talking to a professional. So it's always better when you can take the time and find a company that you trust and then have them kind of work with you on the process. For me, it's not like we have a showroom. Even a lot of my manufacturers don't have showrooms, but we have a lot of brochures. So what I like to do is I set up an appointment. I come on site. I take the measurements myself. I talk to them about different options, and then we discuss all options. A lot of times people have an image in their head of what they want, and I can find it because I've seen a lot of doors. And sometimes they don't really have an idea, but I can kind of guide them based off of how the front of their house looks. Some garages fit better with certain house designs and some don't. And so having that knowledge of what has worked in the past and maybe directing people towards different designs, a lot of times we find the perfect fit, just being able to look through some brochures and talk about the different qualities and different options and different values.
If you've got kind of a very rustic, very simple house, old style or whatever, and then you try to put one of these modern doors on there, it's like a disconnect. So you really want to embrace the appeal that you already have in your home. You're just upscaling it a little bit. So let's say you did the consultation, you're both happy with the choice. At that point, then, is that when you start to pick the actual equipment that will tie with the garage door so that it actually lifts it? Because I know there's a lot of bells and whistles that come with these different brands that are out there. Like some of them do more things than others, and they can lift certain doors and have weight guidelines or whatever. So talk to us a little bit about how do you make that selection? Do they come together with the door, or is that a totally separate thing?
Well, yeah, it's actually a pretty easy process. My suppliers, they bundle everything together. So when you install a new door, the springs on the door have to be rated for the weight of the door. So the manufacturer is going to know the exact weight of the door. So they're going to supply the springs that belong with that door. And then you get new track and new hardware. When you do a new door, I replace everything except for the mechanical operator. And so everything's functioning smoothly. You've got the springs, the rollers, the hinges, the handles, everything's new and good to go. And they do sell them in a bundle. I go to the warehouse, I pick everything up at once. I can deliver it right to my customer and install it. And installs typically take less than a day.
Wow, that fast, huh? That's fantastic. All right, so we kind of have that all set up. You're helping them. We've scheduled the time. Let's take a step in a different direction right now. I know there's going to be a lot of listeners that do not live where we do. There's people listening from all over the world. And I don't know that this necessarily applies from outside of the United States. But what are some recommendations you would have for the listeners to identify who to pick? Because as you know, we have so many choices. How do they know who to trust? What questions they should be asking? How do they know that they're even getting a fair price for their door? From your perspective, put the customer's hat on. I'd like you to kind of share some insights of things that they should be asking or considering so that they can get the right person to help them with this process.
I know that for me, when I'm looking for someone, I will often start with reviews that they have online. If they have a good review online, that's a good place to start. Also, it's nice to know someone who's used the person before. So if you have a next door neighbor and that they've recently had their garage door replaced and you ask them, who did you use? Did you have a good experience? Did you feel like you got a good value? Just do some research. At least in the United States, there's some resources like Next Door Neighbor app where, at least not that I'm aware of, companies can't pay to promote themselves on it. So, it's a lot more organic. And then there's Facebook groups that have referral sources that you can just ask people, hey, I need a garage door person. Who's a good person to use? And then I always love consulting with people over the phone. So if you live in a different area and you want to know what a reasonable price is for a service, I'm happy to talk over it with you, even if you don't live in my region. And knowing that my market is probably a little bit more expensive than a lot of the other ones. So my pricing may be a little bit higher than some of the others, depending on where you live. But I'm more than happy to talk to you about different options and try to help you find someone that's a good fit for you. That's kind of how I go with most contractors, is see if you have someone that has a personal relationship with the person and that they trust them, and then do some research on different people. And it's always good to get multiple estimates so you know whether or not the person that you want to use is high or low or anything like that.
Yeah, and it kind of gives you a guideline because you're not necessarily picking the most expensive or the least expensive. You're trying to look for the range and see if that ties into your budget and if it fits what you're looking for as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't normally recommend people go for the lowest price anyway. I mean, sometimes it works out, but a lot of times you may not get the quality of work that you're looking for. But then you go to the highest price, you may just be finding a company that's taking advantage of people.
So then let's go back to the installation side of it. Now that we know that, hey, I'm comfortable with this contractor, these people are the ones I selected, we now know what garage door to install, and you got the garage door and you're coming. Now, I, as a consumer, what should I expect on the day of installation? How does that look?
Basically, for the installer's perspective, we don't actually need anybody to be around. As long as the garage is clear and someone can let us in, we can just do the whole thing. A lot of times I'll tell people, if you need to run errands or if you need to go to the office, I can call you when I'm almost 30 minutes away from finishing. Or if you're working from home, you can just stay inside in the comfort of your house. I'll back my truck into the driveway. We'll get the door open, make sure everything's cleared out. We do need the vehicles outside of the garage, preferably out of the driveway, so that we can pull our truck in. And then we just take the new door off the truck, set it up inside, and then we disassemble the old door, put it on my truck, strap it down, and then get the new one installed.
And when you say clear out, I assume we're not going to empty the entire garage,
Sure.
but just make sure that there's enough space for you to do your work and the cars are not in the way.
Exactly. I mean, if you use your garage to store a lot of stuff, sometimes you'll have to move some of that out. You'll really want to consult with the garage door technician that's doing the install. Everyone kind of arranges things a little differently, but a good rule of thumb is you look at the track that the door goes in. So when the door is in the open position, the track that holds it up there, if you clear everything that far back, and just so that we have room to put ladders on and and to work around that stuff. That's a good rule of thumb. And the corners, if you got a lot of stuff in the corners, as long as there's room to get to the bolts holding the track to the wall, typically we can work around some shelves and other stuff that's there.
So let's say that all was successful. Everything's installed. It's looking great. I assume that the technician that installed it then is going to test it, make sure that it's working properly. All the springs are done. Again, I'm coming from a consumer standpoint, but what I've heard in the past is that these springs are very dangerous and you don't want to be touching that part of the garage door setup because that
Yeah.
really should be handled by professionals.
Yes, the springs are the most dangerous part of the door. And it's not just the springs, it's everything they're attached to. So they attach to a cable that attaches to the bottom bracket of the door. And so you never want to loosen those bolts because the full tension of the spring is on those bolts. That can swing back if you ever unbolted it. But typically, a good rule of thumb is the springs are completely safe unless you try to adjust them. Once they're set and secure, as long as you're not trying to loosen and adjust them or anything like that, then you don't have any risk of them harming you. Because with the newer torsion spring system, they're completely contained on the torsion bar. And so there's no, even if they break, they can't fly, they won't hurt anybody. But if you started tampering with them and loosening the bolts and trying to make adjustments, that's when you could really get in trouble.
Are the older doors secure that way? Or does this only apply to newer doors?
Well, torsion springs have been around for quite a long time. I don't know exactly when, but I've seen doors that are 40, 50, 60 years old that have torsion springs on them. However, the lighter weight doors for a long time, and even today, some people will still install what's called extension springs. And these are springs that hang over the top of the track instead of it's directly above the door. And they extend and they expand and contract to operate the door. And those are safe too if there's a safety wire, a safety cable run in the middle of them. So they used to install these without safety cables. And so you'll typically only see the real doors without the safety cable. But basically, it's a simple cable that you run through the spring. That way, when it does break, it will be contained on that cable instead of flying. So there is a risk if you have extension springs that they can fly if there's no safety cable. And so and that's something that you can look for. And it's pretty easy to spot. So if you have an old door that has the springs above the track, you just want to make sure that there's a cable run through the middle of the spring, and then you'll know that you've got that safety feature.
And so then what type of warranty comes with an installation on average?
Well, it's going to depend on the company. My warranty is I give a 1-year complete warranty where I cover parts and labor for any manufacturer defects or installation issues. After the year, the manufacturer of the door is going to have some warranties, and that's also going to depend on the manufacturer, but typically you're going to get about a 3 to 5 year to lifetime depending on the door for defects in the manufacturing. And typically the most I've seen for paint color on the door, it's going to be baked on in the factory, and you'll get a 3 to 5 year fade warranty.
Okay, I assume that's all in the contract when they sign and agree to your services or when they hire the contractor to come in and do the installation.
Yeah, for me, I've got it in at the bottom of my invoice, what kind of warranty that it comes with. Again, it's going to depend on the garage door company. Most garage door companies are small, 1 to 2 man operations, and they'll have typically simple contracts, nothing too complicated. But you just want to make sure that you're aware of what service they'll provide. Make sure there's some sort of formality to it.
We talked about the fact that it's generally advised to maintain your garage door once a year. And there's 2 ways we can do that. We can call somebody like you to come in and do it for us, or there are simple things that we can do even throughout the year to keep our doors operating in their maximum. Let's say that life happens, right? People have kids or pets or whatever. Their kid banged their little bicycle accidentally in the garage door. And now this wonderful new garage door has a ding on it. What is the best way to address these imperfections? Is there a service specifically for that, or are you just going to have to live with that ding forever?
Well, you're going to have to live with the ding. I don't know of any myself that do like dent repair on garage doors. It's not like a car where you can take off the panel and start working the dent in from the inside. If it's an insulated door where the steel is sandwiched around, you're not going to be able to get into that and fix the dent. A lot of garage doors have texture. Popping out the dent, you might kind of warp the texture anyway. So you'll have to live with the dent, or if it's a new door, like you said, there is an option to just replace one panel, which isn't going to be the cost of a full door. Normally it's a fraction of the cost and can be done, in an hour. And that's something that if you're willing to pay the extra to get rid of the dent by replacing the panel, that's definitely an option.
Okay, that's good to know. And again, I assume not all doors have panels. Some of them are one big piece, or does that apply to every kind of door?
Well, that's a good point. There are still some in existence that are slowly getting replaced, but I do have some friends that own a company in California, and they say they still manufacture those and install them new all the time. So it really depends on what market you're in, whether it's going to be a panel door. And actually, California's got a lot of different varieties of doors out there, a lot more than this area. So yeah, it is going to depend on the area you're in, but I'd say a majority of residential doors are panel doors that you can repair, but not all of them.
I'm learning so much just talking to you
Yeah.
about all these things. So then general maintenance. So it's either they call you or they take care of it themselves, or maybe both. What are
Yeah.
some things they can do to keep their door working at its best? And then when is it time to call a professional to make sure that the door is always kept running the best way it possibly can so that it's safe and that it's not
Yeah.
noisy and it works right?
There's 4 simple steps that come in a basic tune-up. And the first one is real simple. You make sure all the bolts are tightened, especially on the wooden doors. Bolts tend to work themselves loose. The wood kind of works and moves and shifts. So you just go through. Majority of doors, you can take a 7/16 wrench. Sometimes you'll need a 3/8 or half, but it's normally in that range. You go through, you just make sure all the bolts are staying tight. You don't want to loosen any bolts. You just want to make sure they're tightened, because if you start loosening bolts, then you're going to run into issues. And the next step is you can lubricate. So you spray some lubricant on the hinges and the rollers. You can kind of feel the rollers to make sure they're not too wobbly. You can replace most rollers on your own, but again, it's those bottom rollers that you don't want to touch, because typically you'll have to loosen the bolts to get them off, or manipulate the track, and so you could get into trouble. But if the rollers are getting bad, the hinges and rollers are things you can typically pick up at any hardware store. And the lubricant you can pick up at a hardware store too. If you go to the garage door section of a hardware store, they should have a can that just says garage door lubricant. I highly recommend you use that. A lot of people like to use WD-40. And the thing that a lot of people don't know about WD-40 is it's actually a solvent. And so what WD-40 is it cleans really well. But you can clean a hinge, but if it's not lubricated, then it's just going to cause more issues. WD-40 works great as a solvent. If you wanted to start with that and then come through and lubricate, that would be an option, but don't only use WD-40. And that's pretty much universal. Even if you're using WD-40 in other aspects of your house, you should make sure you're following it with a lubricant to make sure that everything's running optimally.
I actually think it's a customer misconception because we're just so used to the name, and it's a wonderful product. We
Yeah.
use it everywhere and I love it, but it has its specific uses. And I think we've just decided as consumers, oh,
Right?
well, anything that needs to be oiled, we're going to use
Yeah, right?
WD-40. Yeah,
It
we
makes the
make that
noise go away.
assumption.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it seems to be working. But apparently we need to add something extra to it because, like you said, it's not lubricating, it's doing something completely different.
Right. And then the other thing I tell you to avoid is don't put grease on the door. Don't put it in the track. Because what happens when you put grease in the track is you're encouraging the rollers to slide when you want to encourage them to roll. What you would do is you'd spray the lubricant inside the ball bearings of the roller in order to encourage them to continue rolling properly. But then there's 2 other tips that you can use to make sure the door is functioning properly. And these are the important ones where you want to make sure if there is an issue, you call a professional out. And the first thing is to inspect the cables. There are 2 cables that run up and down the side of the door, and they attach to the bottom bracket and they go all the way up to the drums, which are attached to the bar. And this is on a standard torsion system. If there's any fraying on the cable, like there are steel cables, and sometimes something gets cut and the cables start popping loose because there's about 20 cables all wound together to create the one single. And if you start seeing that fraying, especially on multiple points, then you're at risk of the cable snapping. And if the cable snaps, only one half of the door is going to try to lift, and normally it gets pretty cockeyed. So you want to make sure there's no fraying on those cables. And you also want to make sure don't attempt to replace the cables yourself. That's one of the things that's attached to the spring and can be very dangerous if you touch. And then the other thing that's very important is to check the door balance. And how you do that is you make sure the door is in the closed position. And if you have an opener attached, you release it from that and you lift it up halfway. If the door is heavy to lift and it wants to come down after you get to the halfway point, then it's not balanced. On the opposite end, if you go up halfway and then it wants to shoot up the rest of the way, that's also not balanced. It's dangerous because if for some reason the opener stopped working and you need to get out of your house, or you released it halfway up, it could slam and hurt something. And it's also putting wear and tear on the operator itself, because the operators are only designed to work with a certain amount of weight, and you want to make sure that that weight isn't overwhelming it. So if the door, when you test it, isn't balanced, then you want to call a professional out. And then after you've done all these checks, there is another safety feature that you can test, which is for the operator itself. All operators have, by law, they're required to have two safety features. One is the safety sensors at the bottom. If you don't have safety sensors at the bottom of the door, then either your operator is too old or was installed improperly, because those safety sensors are there for a reason. In 1993, the federal government mandated it in the United States as a required feature because there was over 40 children between the ages of 5 and 14 died being crushed by a garage door over the years before 1993. And so those safety sensors are very important to save people's lives and make sure that if a kid or an animal is running across the door while it's closing, it'll automatically reverse. So you want to make sure the sensors are there and that they're functioning properly. They have a force test where if the sensors aren't triggered, the opener is designed so that if it detects extra force while it's closing or opening, then it'll stop working and reverse. So if someone was crushed under the garage, it wouldn't try to continue pushing down. If you put a 2x4 at the base so that the door closes on top of the 2x4 and lay it flat, don't lay it vertically, lay it horizontally. At that 1.5 inches, it should detect that amount of force. And if the door closes and then comes back up, your safety force is working properly.
I know that since we live in an area where it snows, we automatically get to test our sensors on days when it snows, because you get the snow blocking the driveway. And then all of a sudden you're trying to shut the door and you're going, why is it not closing? And then you realize it's because the snow's underneath and you got to shovel all that from the edges because it seems to get in and the sensors detect them. So that's another quick way, especially in wintertime, to figure out. And in a sense, I also like to make sure that's cleared, because sometimes you think you shut your garage door and then it just automatically opens up again because there's the blockage, and you want to make sure your door is secure.
Right. Yeah.
Do you have any tips to share with us in terms of garage door security? Because I've heard a lot of things related to, for example, the emergency handlebar on the top, trying to make sure that that's not accessible for somebody to be able to open the door from the outside and things like that. How do we keep our homes as secure as possible so that we can feel comfortable, at the very least, that the doors are not going to be easy to get into?
And that's a good question. A lot of people are concerned about security, but you also have to balance the idea of security with the idea of safety. Because one of the tips that people do, like you were mentioning, is they put like a zip tie around the emergency release section of the opener. And that helps prevent people from breaking in. But let's just picture a tragedy. If your house is on fire and the only way out is through the garage and the power is out because of the fire and you can't get that loose because you put a zip tie around it, you're risking your own life. So I would actually caution people not do that. That is a way to make your house a little less safe. And obviously that's a rare scenario, but it's also less common for someone to break into a garage. A lot of people find easier ways to get into a house than the garage. Not to say that it hasn't been done. So one major tip is if you have an access point into your house that's lockable, after you get into the garage, lock that. That's a definite good step. And obviously that exposes the stuff inside of your garage. But there are other safety features that are available if you're willing to pay a little extra. The brand of opener that I install is LiftMaster. And LiftMaster's got some proprietary software inside that allows you to connect your opener to your Wi-Fi, so you can download an app. It'll tell you whether your door is open or closed, how long it's been open or closed. You can set it to close at a certain time every night just to make sure that the door is closed. And then some of their Elite Series models have the ability to add an additional locking mechanism that runs to the side of the door, and it'll actually put like a bolt lock above one of the rollers. So if someone was able to manage to release the emergency release cable, they wouldn't be able to open the door because it would still be locked. It's a fully automated lock. So when you push your remote button to open the door, it automatically takes the lock off, opens the door, and then when it closes, it automatically puts the lock in place. If you decided to add a lock yourself that wasn't automated and you try to open the door but you forgot to detach the lock, then you're going to cause a lot of issues with the garage door itself. Newer openers have security features built in. They have rolling codes so that people can't just hack your remote and get in, and they have that extra locking feature that you can upgrade to. And the other thing is, if the door operator is installed and programmed properly, it should give enough pressure closing the door that people wouldn't be able to get into the door and release that cable. So, because a lot of people will get in because it's a little loose at the top. So if you have it adjusted to where it closes really solidly, then it's going to be really hard to break in.
I cannot believe how much I learned today. This is incredible. And I know that our listeners are going to appreciate everything that they picked up from this conversation, because I'm pretty certain they're going to gain some nuggets that are going to help them not only maintain their doors better, but feel more comfortable when they decide that they either need an upgrade or they need to fix their door, and have more information about how to address that. So I can't thank you enough, Chris. I really appreciate you being a guest on the show today.
Well, I really appreciate you having me. It was a privilege to talk to you today.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Yeah, thank you. You have a great one.
That's all for this episode of Live Blissed Out. Thanks for listening, and thank you to Chris Tyrell for joining me today and for sharing tips on garage doors. Join us again next week for another informative and motivational show. Please visit liveblисsedout.com for access to all our podcasts and resources, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you find value in our show, please leave an honest review either on the website or on Apple Podcast. Plus, if you haven't done so yet, join our Facebook community at facebook.com/groups/LBO podcast. It's a great place to engage. So long for now, and remember to keep moving forward.